the afternoon. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to just do a little bit of chat and kill a little bit of time while we wait for a few more people to come in from the waiting room. But it's lovely to see you here so far. We have got a great lineup this afternoon, which I'm really looking forward to getting into the conversation. And over the next hour, we are going to be hearing from these various different people about the topic of digitizing construction, which is absolutely crucial as we start to kind of move forward over the next few years. So for those of you that don't know me, that haven't come across me, I'm Jessie Wild, and I am one of the directors for the Bristol Housing Festival, and I'm going to be your chair for this afternoon. Just for a little bit of admin while we're kind of waiting for a few more people to arrive, if you've got questions that you're interested in asking any of the panelists as we go through, please do add them into the chat as we go. I'm going to collate all of those towards the end and put them to the panel, so do keep popping them into the Q&A, and they will be collected and turned to the panel. We've also got a few that came in ahead of the webinar, which is brilliant, so I'll be kind of pulling on those as we go as well. This webinar is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube, so if you have a problem with your kind of face being on YouTube or what have you, please do keep your video off, and I ask that everybody would keep yourself muted for the duration of the webinar, just so that we can hear clearly from the speakers. So as I mentioned, I'm from the Housing Festival, and if you've not heard of us, Bristol Housing Festival is working within Bristol really to look at supporting innovation in building, particularly focused on MMC, modern methods of construction. We all kind of know that we're facing and experiencing in some respect that we're facing a housing crisis, we're facing a climate and ecological crisis, we are facing a skills shortage, and things need to be done to start to address those challenges. Now, at the Housing Festival, we know that MMC isn't the silver bullet, it isn't the one thing that's going to fix all those problems, but we do recognise it is a real opportunity to tackle those challenges holistically and start to look at the whole of the issue and start to think about how these challenges overlap, and look at actually promoting a bit of a step change in the way that we're delivering houses. So one of our key priorities as the Housing Festival is to showcase and celebrate good ideas of that, and we've come to get to know our panelists today through that process, through showcasing good ideas, through championing innovation in various different forms. This webinar is part of a series, that is funded by Workforce for the Future, which is specifically looking at supporting SMEs, so small to medium enterprises, to gain exposure to modern methods of construction, to MMC, to help them prepare, I suppose, for the future of what the construction industry could be. So we're working with a company called YTKO and another company called Moby to deliver this project, this Workforce for the Future project. And the aim is really, as I say, to engage with SMEs in the built environment to help bridge that skills gap between what has previously been much more traditional build and then moving into sort of MMC. MMC is gaining momentum, and there is a real opportunity for SMEs to start to align with the change that's happening, and there's a risk that if they don't, that they'll be kind of left out of particular opportunities. So this program is really looking to help with that alignment and provide grant funding that's been provided to that end. So if you're watching this online after the event, there'll be links in the chat below, but also if you're here now and you're interested in that grant funding, in further information about the whole program of the Workforce for the Future, then do have a look on our website for the links that will go in the chat later, and you'll be able to see more about the selection of webinars that are put on, the site visits that are on, and also the kind of fully funded training that is available. So do follow those links. Now, enough of the kind of pre-spiel, but this particular event is looking at digitizing construction. So we're looking at how digital technology is transforming the construction industry and giving us a better understanding of performance, of social and economic impacts of our buildings, And also we want to kind of look at the unique opportunity that MMC has in this space. So I'm really delighted to introduce our speakers today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and their roles properly rather than kind of butchering my way through it. So we're going to start by going to each of the speakers in turn, and they're going to share a little bit about their stake in this topic, and their role in the built environment within this topic, and then we will come back together for, as I say, Q&A and discussion a little bit more. So I'm going to just allow speakers to roll from one to the other, and I'm only going to interrupt you speakers if you're running way over your kind of 5-minute timeline, but assume that you won't do, and do just roll from one to the other. And we will come to Ron first, then over to Simon, on to Chris, and then to Joseph, and then I will pick up after Joseph, if that's all right. So Ron, let me hand to you. Please do introduce yourself and then crack on and tell us what you've got to tell us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jessica. All right, I'm going to share my screen. I've only got a couple of slides, but I thought it would help with what I'm trying to articulate today. So just bear with me a second. That's not very helpful. It's not letting me share what I want to share, unfortunately. Okay, I'll try and talk through it instead, Jessica. So this could get quite the ride. So Ron Lang, I'm technical director for DFMA over at Atkins. Prior to Atkins, I worked with the Construction Innovation Hub for around 4 years and continue to work with them in my new role, predominantly in 2 spaces. So one around value-based decision making. So I led the development of the value toolkit for a couple of years, and also around the platform approach to construction. So what I wanted to try and do today, Jessica, with the aid of some clearly fantastic slides that you can't see, I often use these sessions to get things off my chest. So I'm going to do the same today, if that's okay. And I will end up in answering the actual question around digitization of the sector. So as technical director for DFMA, the question I get on an almost daily basis is, what are the benefits of DFMA? And usually they put a slash in there and add MMC afterwards as well. What we're trying to understand with this, straight away, that's a kind of red herring question, I guess. What we need to understand is that these are different things that we're talking about, and the value is context specific. So I suppose I've got a number of kind of key steps that I would suggest you go through to answer that question correctly. The first being, of course, given my background over the last couple of years, what does value actually mean to a client in the context in which they're operating the particular project or program? So do we understand why they're actually building the thing, or whether they should build the thing in the first place? What their strategic outcomes are, what their strategic risks are, and what their underlying kind of values and principles are as an organization. Once we understand that, and I would caveat that never enough time is spent doing that at the front end of projects. That's one of my kind of soapbox points, I suppose. Once we understand that, we can then move on to the DFMA part of the question. Now, one of my favorite points about DFMA is that it is a means to an end. It's not an end in its own right. So how do we understand, how do the inherent attributes of a DFMA-led process actually benefit the client? So once we understand what the client's trying to drive, are there certain attributes of a DFMA process which will enable clients to derive benefit? The next step is then to understand that if DFMA is effectively an enabler of MMC, so by taking a design for manufacture and assembly approach, we create the conditions required in a project or a program to actually start to leverage the benefits of MMC solutions. And of course, once we understand that and we start to look into MMC in more detail, different MMC solutions, again, will offer different types of benefit depending on what the client is after. So that third step is around saying, what are the inherent attributes, again, or conditions of an MMC type approach, which are valuable to the client? So what I've described there is a kind of complex interweaving, and you kind of alluded to this in your opening statement, Jessica, is that trying to answer a benefits case for any particular instance is very complicated. So I suppose I wanted to kind of cover 3 final points with it. The first one is, as I've said, that the answer to the question of, what are the benefits of DFMA or MMC? The answer really is it's not that simple, and that sounds like a very very simple and kind of get out of jail free card answer. But there are 3 key points to think about. Firstly, the attributes or outcomes of a particular solution can only be classed as a benefit if they support the core value drivers of a project or a program. Secondly, the interplay between these different domains, as in approaches, solutions, values, is very complex. And this is where I wanted to come to answer the question. We need richer data models that link all these different outcomes and impacts together to enable us to better understand and respond to the needs of a client. And then finally, if we've got those data models in place, and underpinning our decision making critically, we can start to actually deliver better value for the client and better outcomes for society. So I suppose my opening pitch is to say that it's very, very complex when we look at solving problems within particular scenarios or contexts, and we need data to help us to understand how these different things, how these different inputs and outputs and outcomes and impacts are all linked together, such that we can start to pull the right strings when it comes to particular projects or programs. So I'm going to leave it there if that's okay.
Wonderful. I'm just going to hand over to Simon. I think you're muted, Simon.
Yeah,
there we
go.
go.
Very much. Thank you, Ron, and thanks everybody. Yeah, so my name is Simon Cross. I'm the director at Cast Consultancy, best known for where Mark Farmer is the CEO. My role is focused on digitalisation and innovation within Cast and its projects. Cast, I also lead the Construction Leadership Council focused on outcomes and digitalisation as well. My role at Cast effectively is to oversee a number of projects. We have about £1 billion worth of projects in the residential sector per year, roughly, and those are mainly medium to high-rise buildings. Each and every one of those has an element of MMC in them. So we've managed to now focus on a number of different aspects, and I'll come on to it in a minute. So I wanted just to spend 5 minutes talking through my perspective, first of all from the CLC, and then also from Cast and what I see coming along the road and the change in digitalisation. Related to the Construction Leadership Council, quite a long time now I've been chairing a group around residential outcomes, but mainly about simple outcomes, unlike Ron's background. Mainly about data already able to be gathered from the sector. And that predominantly has been through a number of areas around cost predictability, safety, productivity, energy and carbon, waste, speed and PMV, social and community and digital maturity, a number of outcomes that we've collected over the last 3 to 4 years. What I would say about this is that there are a number of things going on here. On the digital side, we can see an evolution of digital tools being created to help predict and calculate through the REBA stages what exactly we can see. We can see correlations between cost and productivity, man hours on site, for example. We can start to see some mathematical absolute causation and correlations from one project to another as we move through the data sources. And the data is starting to mature as the digitalization of these measures continues to mature in capture, but also in reporting and understanding. So that's my CLC experience. I'm trying to be as brief as possible. My role, the role of digital as I see it going forward, I see digital not just analytics and communication, but a significant aspect of business model change. I'm trying to articulate all the elements of digital to bring together a systematic disruption to the sector, which drives efficiencies and results in what those outcomes we want to be for a client's brief. Every client's brief changes, and we need to articulate and work out exactly what's going to happen. Increasingly, I've been working with organizations like Autodesk and helping those guys understand their stack and how they can help deliver the changes between the different workflows, the DFMA workflows, as well as the MMC workflows. And I've also been helping to understand how that integrates into the supply chain. And that's really important to me around digitalization. It tends to be a very BIM, top-heavy subject, and to me it's not. And my experience is that we're seeing that through a number of eyes now. To answer the question around shifts of the role in digital and what change I've actually seen, I want to talk about my Cast experience briefly. So I mentioned about digital models and to assist maturity. I do genuinely believe that we're starting to see that shift now. And we're seeing organizations, SaaS business models, different business models that can link technology and disrupt and make those changes for the sector. And I've seen that, and I get regular calls from many digital organizations wanting to measure this. It could be very wide, it could be very narrow, it could be cost orientated, it could be supply chain orientated, Most of my calls around digitalization, the work I've been doing is looking at the placement between land and acquisition. So looking at feasibility studies and how we can articulate to a developer whether that piece of land will be able to return a significant return on investment for a given number of properties. And that kind of disruption you can start to see through would normally be in a normal consultancy basis, but now we can do that through technology, linked through APIs, through different software organizations, and working in partnership with them. The second thing I'm starting to see is a shift of systems. So I spend a lot of time with Mark Farmer, as you can imagine, and we focus on the MMC framework and the pre-manufactured value. And what I've done is created a digital tool, and we hope that's going to be of value to the sector, for organizations to understand how much is being produced off-site and on-site. So in this case, it's an estimating tool. And what we're seeing happening increasingly there is what I call systems of systems, effectively. Material systems, actual material product systems. We have to articulate that through the MMC framework in housing. But we're also seeing a similar systems of systems and interconnection on the digital side. So through the likes of APIs and connecting one software system to another. I'm spending a lot of time doing that, and I can see that evolving very, very quickly now. And there's some great examples, some very simplistic examples. For example, site date records are being captured by organizations like MSite through site gates. We can therefore understand how many hours people are on site, and we can correlate that to the impact of MMC. So if we take a category 1 volumetric approach, we can correlate that data actually on site and see that it's had a significant reduction in man hours, a significant reduction in safety incidents on site. And I'm spending a lot of time doing that. And it's exciting to see the theory turn into reality through our projects. The third shift I'm seeing is the move to mobile technologies and IoT. That's no surprise there, but being used in very different ways. So traditionally, safety apps. I've spent a lot of time working with safety apps. I'm moving quite firmly now into fire safety and installation issues, as well as snagging and quality apps are starting to evolve. But I do see issues related to quality because there's no standardization of the way we approach quality just yet. I know it's coming from the work from the CIH and others, but we started to see a standardization of data and how it's going to operate. And the fourth thing, just to finish on, where I see large switch and change and drive, is significant large software organizations are now invested in this sector. And that's been a switch. I've seen many people leave construction organizations and join Microsoft, organizations like Salesforce, the shift of knowledge of the construction sector to Autodesk. You know, Autodesk is mainly an American company, and now seeing vertically integrated teams inside of the UK focused on the UK's requirement around construction and housing. And these shifts are really important because knowledge of construction inside of digital data large companies and organizations will assist in delivering the better workflows that we need. So that's me finished. That's my quick snap for a few minutes. And I think I'm passing over to Chris going forward.
Chris, you're muted.
Two years of doing this, and you'd think I'd learn how to unmute. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Mortensen. I'm one of the co-founders and chief product officer at Modulus. Modulus, we're a construction technology business that's really focused on creating a platform to enable the high-speed design and delivery of sustainable, healthy, and affordable homes. And we're looking at a global scale for that. And for us, when we think about technology, there's really two portions that we look at. So we have a tech that sits across a physical entity, so that's more akin to the MMC and the offsite production, and then that's paired hand in hand with the digital technology suite of tools that we're building. So when we look at that physical product line, going back to some of the stuff that Simon was talking around a systems approach, we're really based on a kit of parts approach, so a standardized methodology of design and delivery. We're utilizing a sub-assembly approach where we work with our supply chain and our manufacturing partners to deliver us higher value goods, so we don't have the intricacies of procurement and cataloging thousands and thousands of components, and we've simplified that. And we work with third-party assemblers and partner contractors to deliver those on site on our behalf. And then on the digital standpoint, we're working from an end-to-end solution. So right at the front end, from generative design, concept design, all the way through delivery on site, we're building a suite of tools. And really, for us, where the power comes in is the confluence of those two things. So as Jesse said in her opening, the idea of MMC being able to be the silver bullet, it's not, nor is digital design tools as a silver bullet. For us, it really is, and I'm not saying ours is the magic answer either, but we see the combination of that physical and the digital as one of the key ways to drive efficiency through our system. And because of that physical ingestion, so if we look at how we take a physical kit of parts, digitize that and ingest that into a digital platform, that allows a much richer data environment from which we can build models and deliver from. So for us, what that allows us to do is when we sit down with clients, we can go through our generative design tool, we can look at a plot of land, we can interrogate that plot of land, but what we can give them rendered solutions, but we can understand what the sustainability credentials of that, we can understand what the health and wellness credentials of that. We give them real costing and real programming so they can make real life decisions quicker. So we're moving away from this moving up towards a goal, but giving them a data-driven solution. And so for us, looking at how we approach it, and this is the tools that we're utilizing internally, but that we'll be releasing later this year, it's around creating more efficiencies within the system and allowing those decisions to be made in a more efficient way, whereas the old traditional way is kind of very fragmented and loss of information and always having to build back up every time there's that handshake of information. So for us, it's that kind of golden thread that we're trying to weave through that entire process from the moment we sit down with that client to the day that we hand over keys to those individuals. So as a quick intro, that's us, and I'll hand over to Jarvie.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So I'm here more from modern methods of construction. To me are a bit of a misdemeanor in that we say modern method, but we use traditional materials and the like. And I think the digitization on the front end is important. But I think for me and my role as CEO and founder of Utopia, and also my role as a board member of the UK Business Council for Sustainable Development and advisor to Bayes and Construct Zero, it's actually saying, well, do any of these buildings that we build with these kits of parts continue and maintain performance over a period of time? If you bought a Tesla and 10 years later, it was not 300 miles, it was 170 miles, you would be fuming. And we don't have that data in any real built environment outside commercial. And that's because we have BMS systems. So Utopia, what we've looked at and what I've looked at from a policy is, well, what is carbon? The third law of thermodynamics says carbon, energy is energy. But yet we evaluate it in multitude of different ways. Policy lets us look at it in all these different sets, but there's a reality. You have an organizational amount of carbon, you have an embodied carbon in your product, and then you have operational carbon and how that product performs over time. And will that product that you've just bought, unlike your iPhone battery in your phone, continue to perform over time? So we classify ourselves as an ecchi-tech company. We were called prop tech and other things. We're energy, construction, intelligent technology. And what we're trying to do is drive and push forward and ask the questions around, okay, so we build this amazing building out of this amazing kit of parts at an affordable cost. But what do the 150 to 200 tons of CO2 that are produced over a mortgage life do, and how does it continue to perform? How do we install intelligent technology in the built asset or retrofit it to existing buildings to say, well, okay, what we've designed and constructed or what we're applying our energy technologies to, how is it going to perform long term? And how do we quantify and guarantee and assure that? And then as the future changes, as we move away from gas, we move to more compartmentalized timing with energy, which means production at peak times and movement. How are we then managing our own built assets and systems, these modern methods of construction? How, once we built this modern construction thing, how then in 5 to 10 years time does it maintain that modern aspect? And so really we're looking at the elements of carbon, its transition across its line, how you monitor that from a digital perspective, how you monitor every piece of carbon throughout the process. And then actually, once we build these net zero, whatever you want to call them, buildings, in 5 or 10 years time, or every year, how do we quantify how that building performs and give the consumer that benefit of not having a home that over time fails? And that really is what modern methods of construction means to me. And yeah, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you, Chris, Ron, and Simon as well for your introductions. That's really helpful. So to kick off our discussion and our Q&A, if you do have any questions, just as an aside, do please put them into the chat, and then I will incorporate them in the conversation as we go. But to begin, I'd like to sort of turn back to you as panelists to ask whether any of you had any questions for each other or any comments on each other's statements, whether there was anything that anybody said that kind of piqued your interest that you'd like to comment on.
Yeah, I'll chime in, Jessica, if that's okay. I can't find the hand, so
Yeah.
sorry for not being polite. I think certainly what I pick up from kind of what Joseph and Simon were both saying, and in conjunction what I was saying, is that the data models that I'm talking about need to link all of those phases. So it starts actually at the end where Daniel's talking about. So if we understand better how things are performing, whether we've actually delivered the outcomes that we thought we would, and how those different types of performance are linked to human behavior, for example, as well. We can then obviously use that at the front end to understand how to design better. So I think what I'm advocating for is a much richer data set to understand how different types of performance, different types of interaction, different types of outcomes, all those different words that we hear all the time are linked, such that when anyone is designing anything, we understand what those links are. We understand which levers to pull effectively to get the benefits that the client wants. And I think bringing Chris into the equation, a lot of the work that I'm doing around platform approaches requires us to understand what customers want. There's a lot around what needs to be bespoke and what needs to be standardized. So I think there's a big point for me, and I wrote this down while people were talking, that we need to help. I think we need to use better information management, help clients to articulate their desired outcomes more clearly and consistently. And if you put yourself in Chris's shoes and others, supply chain will be much better equipped in those scenarios to develop solutions which genuinely add value. I think clients don't articulate their requirements particularly clearly. I think they do it in very much a project setting rather than a kind of portfolio program setting. And again, if we can then bring clients together with their sort of harmonized requirements, if you like, we can then start to look at rationalizing those, understand where clients really need uniqueness and difference and customization, and where actually they would drive massive benefit from starting to standardize across requirements. So just a couple of my thoughts there, but that idea of a data model which spans the whole of the asset lifecycle to inform better design is really critical.
Yeah, and if I don't mind, I think, I want to give you guys an alive and incredible example of modern methods of construction being only as modern as the components they use when it comes to a consumer. We had plot 4 and plot 5 at the award-winning R&D site that we developed, and they are identical. When I mean identical, they're identical. We've got thinner walls than traditional methods of construction, so they've got more floor space. They were versatile in design, which meant we were able to do these incredible things. So we use the modern method of construction toolkit, all these different tools, design these amazing buildings, and the EPCs came out at 104. Wow. One consumer decided that they were going to install and utilize some of the smart technologies, and they were really going to understand their system. They were going to sign up to the Agile tariff for their solar in the summer, then they were going to move on to their Go tariff in the winter to charge their car. They were able to set their settings, understanding what the heating system did, and really enable their system to perform in its best entirety. And then what ended up happening with the next door neighbor, again, identical house, didn't do those things. And we found that the watts per square meter average for the house that was using it properly was 25 to 30. But the watts per square meter average of thermal requirement, energy requirement on the other house was around 70, where your building code is 100. So it's really that, and I pose the question for the rest of the call, how do we, when we use this kit of parts, where is the transition to the biggest fundamental flaw in construction in general, which is human utilization and consumption? And how do we, as you just said there, amazingly, how do we create that digital book from beginning through to consumer usage to create that linearage?
Simon, you've got your hand raised. I think that hopefully that's all right. Just gonna say, yeah, a couple of things. I think we're all agreeing on this kind of data approach. I wanted to just go back to your question, Jessica, about Chris, and just ask him. He's got some software now, and he's focused on standardization. I'd be interested to hear from Chris about how his approach to that is and how he's what he's using as standardization around data to support his software, and whether we've already got alignment on this call between what we've talked about, and actually, is it just about us interconnecting better as people and understanding what we're doing around standardization of data? Question for Chris there. Chris?
Yeah, standardization is absolutely key for us. And when we started this 4 years ago, I think we had this idea that, MMC in the way we were approaching it, we can have, give every client everything they wanted and have this kind of bespoke nature, going back to Ron's what needs to be bespoke versus what needs to be standardized. And then we were thinking about this on the kind of flat level or building level, but with the standardization.
This is a Great Western Railway service to London Paddington.
A little bit of feedback there. We were looking around standardization more on the component and subcomponent level, but allowing kind of this infinite level of bespoke. But actually, the reality is when we start to dig into what actually the clients need, they at an affordable or market rate apartment level, it's vastly different than this idea that we need to have infinite flexibility for anyone, because then that just starts to create inefficiencies in the process yet again, and adds complexity both to the digital data set as well as to the physical kit of parts. So for us, the technology is one thing that has two different streams, and standardization is absolutely key. And I guess about 9 months ago, we made the decision to jump to the US as well. So we started a small group out in Seattle. We happened to get a really great high quality team from what was Katera, and their product approach and their standardization has driven a lot of what we've been looking at as well. And so they went down this arc. At one point, we looked at some of the work they had done, and they had we looked at 5 key national clients that they had, and across all of them, they had something like 130 different apartment types in their library, and then which is just too much, right? It's too much to from a digitization standpoint, but also from a physical production standpoint. And then over the course of time, we went through this rationalization and came down to a distinct standardized library of apartments, and then looked at how that met against the client requirements. And it met 93% of those client requirements from 137 down to, I think it was 7 or 8 handed apartments. And so we're going through this logic and we're going, okay, actually, what does need to be bespoke versus what does need to be standardized from the physical standpoint, from, say, the apartment level. And you can still have bespoke buildings that are made up from lots of standard libraries. And then that translates back down to that digital tool set, which simplifies the process for us. So
yeah, I think, Chris, that's really important as well, is that it's that standardization moving into customization. We have a custom division. We're building in Middle East. We built in USA. And when we speak about that data set, the differential between the UK and USA and anywhere else is language of R value and inches and feet. So ultimately, we use the same terminology, right? So we do use millimeters. We still do kilowatt hours. We still do U value and thermal values. But when it comes to this design element, one of the issues I feel we're going to continue to bump into, and Chris, you probably have seen this as well, is that you can standardize components that then utilized together can create really fundamentally different elements. But the issue with that is that then you're subject to the local policy and plan and thermal rate or the energy regulations and or the design principles. And we've had it recently. We had a 70-year-old house builder. They put a brick building around a net zero ready MMC building for no other reason than the building controller had an opinion on a certain element within the build process, and the planner required a certain style, which meant you were limited to brick dimensions. And so I wonder, Chris, what your thoughts are on that. We as an industry seem to have this roadblock against existing systems that just can't keep up yet, that they aren't adaptive enough to some of these unique changes that will give better results.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of things in there that are quite interesting. One is around local planning policies, both here in the UK and then how that translates internationally. From our standpoint, that starts with that standardized kit of parts, right? And this is probably similar to you. You've got a standard design methodology in terms of what your wall buildups look like, et cetera, and how you approach that. And look at R value or U value. You could do the unit conversions, but there's a performance there regardless. And so for us within our generative design tool, we're ingesting local requirements, whether that's Part L and then the local interpretation, or whether that's California's Title 24, which is their local energy code. And then for us, within our tool, we can only design and build, we can only design around the kit of parts that fits that rule set. Now here, we do have to work with multiple planning departments and have that ability to flex from, I don't know, brick buildings to, Georgian or whatever, wherever you are, right? It has to be able to fit into that local context. And so what that wraparound is for us, it almost, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but I guess we're fundamentally, as modulists, looking at multifamily, multi-story, and so that fits a certain kind of context into itself. And so we're not going for single-family bespoke nature. We're standardizing to a point where we already fit into a kind of product vertical. And I say product vertical in terms of what the outside world looks like. And so we work with the councils. We'll have different options within that data set that allow us to apply the correct or the accepted or the local vernacular from a design treatment standpoint. How that fits specifically with each design, that has to fit with a standardized apartment or flat layout that might not optimize the land to its boundaries to the nth degree, but we have to just make judgment calls on that and what's better to get an extra half a meter of land or to be able to build that building and design it 12, 18 months quicker than traditional would.
Mm.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. Ron, I'm going to come to you just now, and then I'd love to pick back up your statement about kind of data capture and how we capture data in a kind of collective full set. But Ron, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell too much on the kind of what's standard and what's variable point, but just picking up on Joseph's question there about sort of external treatment and planning conditions. I think one of the benefits of the sort of kit of parts approach is for the elements that you do start to standardize and for the sort of design principles that sit behind those, you could be much clearer about the interface with the sort of non-standardized elements. So certainly through the work we're doing on the platform rulebook, we recognize that very unlikely that any projects will ever have no element of bespoke design, whether that be substructure or kind of aesthetic treatment. But what you benefit from is saying that those bespoke elements have very clearly defined interfaces with the bit that's standardized. So I think what the point I wanted to make was that I think we'll start to see more innovation in those sort of external treatments and those more bespoke elements, just because we're more clear about how they'll interface. And it means that every job isn't different, and that suddenly working to brick dims is a bit of a nightmare and all the rest of it. So I think by standardizing the kind of core set of things, you'll then start to see more innovation in those more bespoke elements. That was the only point I wanted to make. Thank you.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you, Ron. I think for me, there's a question here around thinking about a more kind of digital future is going to require more data to be collected, as the points have been made. And I suppose from a client's perspective, from somebody who wants to see a house built, from a local authority or a housing association that actually wants to serve their clients, their tenants, etc., there's an element where I would suggest that perhaps they're always going to see things in their unique perspective. Planners, for example, are always going to see certain sites in the context of what they see their sites in the context of their city, of their policies, of their mayoral priorities, for example, if that's what it is. So it's almost, and I wonder what you think of this in terms of the standardization element and the collection of data that needs to be standard. How do we standardize something that people don't want to be standardized? They like to be seen as unique. They like to be see their particular project or their particular city as different to everybody else's, where you're absolutely right, they aren't, but they want to think of themselves like that. So how do we get over the barrier of the sort of, I suppose, perception from the outside and then versus what's real on the inside? I'm going to come to Simon first and then over to Ron.
Yeah, sure. I'll try and answer the question. What we've tried to do at CAST specifically is look at project briefs, housing project briefs, and then create a set of standard outcome-based measures against those project briefs. And then across different projects, look at a set of standard outcomes, and we pick a mix. So that's our approach to it. And so for example, if you wanted it to be a low carbon building, zero carbon building, that would be a statement within the brief, and it would maybe specify the BREEAM rating. We would drop down to embodied and operational carbon figure, and then we'd use that across the range. And to me, they're already pretty standardized, those measures. There are a few that aren't. Quality is not standardized, in my view, aren't standardized. And also working on site is not, man hours on site is not standardized. That's been our approach. And increasingly, we are doing that now from a point of starting in a specification. So asking local authorities or clients to specify that. So CAST are a client consultant, so we can help them formulate their approach. That's either through a specification approach or indeed through working through preliminaries and requesting that all supply chain, including main contractors, builders, actually gather data. So that's really important. Specification of data gathering is not talked about, but we expect it to happen when people turn up with different software packages to collect data, but it's not method. There's no method behind it. So we started to introduce that now across all our projects and look at a way of doing that. And clients are really, actually surprisingly, clients really want it. They really want it because then they can understand performance, outcome-based performance on their briefs.
Brilliant. That was going to be my next question. Is it working? That's your approach, but what's the attitude been to it? So that sounds really positive. Ron?
I think Simon's covered quite a lot of that usefully, but I think for me it's this illusion of choice type thing you see in other sectors. So the options you get on a new car, let's bring Tesla back in, as Joseph said. The options you get on a new car are actually quite limited, but the combination of those options makes you feel special. And I don't know, it's still true. There used to be a statement that there'd never been a Mini come off the line that was the same to another. I think for me, it's about showing the data. So I'm starting to see a really encouraging sign. So if you look at large programs like the New Hospitals program, or you look at smaller kind of research programs like AIM-CH, which I think is recently completed, what they do is they actually show clients what's really changed. So you're right, you'll have a conversation where people feel they needed to change certain things or they need to be special. And you see this particularly across, for example, clinicians in different health trusts. When you actually show them based on past projects, and that's the critical thing looking back, what they really changed and what was really different and whether that difference was needed or not, I think you start to sort of confront the real issue, which is that actually there's not as much variance needed as perhaps is claimed. So I think, again, the role of data for me is kind of showing people what's the reality versus what they kind of think. So there's a whole kind of cognitive dissonance issue here where people don't want to be told that actually you're making exactly the same decisions as a trust over there. So could we standardize that? Oh, well, no, that's kind of our discretion. So I just wanted to kind of bring that illusion of choice and cognitive dissonance in as a couple of concepts worth looking into.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joseph, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, and I think that perfectly, the comment I wanted to make just at the beginning when you said this compared to where now and Simon and Ron's comments bring it full circle in that, it's about those performance-based outcomes and the relevance that has. Now, we can get into the conversation around localization and interpretation. And I think we have to steer away from that because politically, whether you're a social capitalist or liberal, the choice is down to the human. And I don't think we should ever be saying ever. And I believe it'd be wrong to say that, well, everyone should be having the same looking style. But it is about that informed decision making. And again, I beg the question, take away a BMS value, so a building management system, take away the fact that you've got these huge fees. How can you, in a residential application right now, go to any organization outside of maybe 2 or 3 in this whole country building all these houses and buildings and say, well, can you show me how your building performs in terms of light levels, air intake for purification, the true energy performance, the watts per square meter? And they can't really. And then the consumers tell you how they want it. And we must not take away from the fact that these consumers, unlike hospitals, which are one-off big projects, and I agree on that, homes people use as they see fit, and they want to change them as they see fit. So when we look at construction, I do think we make a mistake on generalization. We talk about kind of application of large rise buildings where everyone gets the same. And there's a reason that people want to buy apartments less in the under 30, under 35 generation now, looking at more localized urban living. Plug the Gap project from Bristol Council, using smaller homes in better applications. but it's because people still want that choice, because the freedoms of social environments has given us that. So I think it's a very important line, and I think all of it starts to feed into what is, I think, the definition and the defining piece of what will make MMC, and that will be ESG and its funding. I think MMC, its applications, digitization, digital outputs is going to provide funding in ESG, which we've seen evidence of, that's going to make it cheaper, more affordable, and better to build. And I think just like the car of Tesla and its Lloyd's offering and its discount on taxes, I do believe that the ESG element and how MMC Digital plays a role in providing, social values, showing data, showing the environmental impact, that is what's going to really unlock and define MMC. It's going to take it to that next level. We're saying, well, why were we doing it traditional when we couldn't get these data sets to provide, use of good quality people and funds? I think there's a big context around all that.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much, Joseph. I've got a few questions that I'd like to sort of pull together and put to the panel that have come in from even the Q&A box, or have come in ahead of time. So I'm going to start with the one from Ellen in the box that says, as digital capabilities increase, what does the industry need to do to stimulate demand for data models, decision support? How are we matching digital skills with demand to realise the potential value? So is there anyone on the panel that wants to kind of kick us off on how we look at stimulating the demand for those data models?
Yeah, I'm happy to
Brilliant, thank you. I was going to say we've got a stunned silence, which
no, yeah, I mean, what's gonna drive it is, I think the primary example to look at right now is that you wouldn't know that building this way using data sets, as I mentioned, that amazing house owner we've got on one of our developments now. It's just understanding what's happening and changing in the environments that cost them the most. I think that's the biggest one. That's what we've seen from consumers. We've got audit data from all these different places and homes, and we're really looking at it on a molecular level. And what we're seeing is a pattern where someone is super happy and happy to accept changes and happy to accept differences because their bills are one quarter, and they're being adaptive and intelligent because what they realize is their decision making with their data is allowing them to save money. But that's also having an ongoing impact for the social benefit of that person. So for me, I think the trigger for data, that trigger of usage is, unfortunately, in my opinion, I don't believe it should be financially linked, but it will be. Because, people that own homes want to have cheaper to run homes, and people that build homes, a developer wants to make more profit, regardless of what we think. Developers like to make profit, people like to have less bills, and towns like to have more houses. And so I think that trigger, or again, of that ESG and the human impact, I think they're going to be the triggers for data. People are going to accept it and say, okay, actually, if I can build cheaper, I can build more, I can build more socially and environmentally, and the consumer can say, well, I can save more. That's when data in the built environment and MMC is going to start to become mass acceptable, and everyone's going to be on this train, as it were.
That's really helpful. And I think on the back of that, I've had another question around the risk, and perhaps, Simon, I could come to you on this, but particularly what really is the risk if we don't embrace digitization of the construction industry, both now with the technology that's available to us now, but also thinking 10, 20, 50 years into the future? If the industry isn't embracing the digital future, what's the risk of that? What's the risk on society, on the construction industry?
So many answers I can give to that, I think. Look, it's inevitable, is my opinion. On disruption, whether we do it ourselves or somebody disrupts us from another sector, it's a matter of time. So that's one risk. And the clear risk to me is, we're out now in a position where we can use technology to understand performance. And in residential homes and in the housing sector, in any building where MMC is used or not used, we should be able to now demonstrate the actual true evidence of how it performs. We're in that position to do it. And I think without doing that, I think, first of all, we need to do it, even though we could be embarrassed with the results. And I think that's fine. We need to know where we stand now. So there's a risk that we leave it and we don't take it on as a sector ourselves, as specialists in that area. Other companies come in. There's a risk that the consumer sector, turns off new build housing, for example, and wants to go over to retrofit because they trust their own ability to refurbish their own building themselves, or to undertake changes themselves. But there are numerous risks. There's a risk to business models. consultants, architects, engineers not embracing digital and being threatened down the line by a software company who can do it for them without the need for their skills. There's so many risks. That's just a few I can take to the top of my head.
Brilliant. Chris, you raised your hand, and then over to you, Ron.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there's two huge risks. One is we just don't build enough homes for people, and because the current traditional setup just isn't producing, right? We're constantly underproducing the number of homes, and depending on which number you want, there's the U.S. or the UK government or the numbers that are coming out of universities, but we're in deficit by something like 140,000 homes in this country per annum, and it's just showing that we're not set up to do it. So I think if we have a digitized process that allows more efficiency, then we can get there quicker. And then on the second half of that equation is we don't just want to build homes, we want to build great homes. And that means from a health and wellness, that means from an environmental, and that means from a social justice standpoint. And so when we start to take into account the climate crisis and the goals of the Paris Agreement and trying to stay within the 1.5 degrees, we have to get very serious about producing solutions that are carbon zero across, not just in operation, but across the life cycle. So that's embodied, that's in retrofit, that's across the entire scope of carbon. And without having digital tools to allow us to get there, we're just going to constantly fall short. So even if we start to build enough homes, we're going to fall short on something that is really important for our generation, but also future generations. So for me, that's the bigger of the two risks. But we still need to solve that housing crisis, and fundamentally, I think that's why everybody's here. We've got people who are embracing technology to allow for that.
Yes, absolutely, Chris. Ron, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was trying to work out if I could give a simpler answer, I guess, to what is a very complex and multifaceted question, as Simon said. But I think I want to believe consumers will demand better outcomes and better performance, and this is certainly in the space that Joseph talks about. And frankly, incumbents won't be able to deliver that without taking data-driven decisions more seriously. I think the caveat, I suppose, to that is that the current kind of supply and demand dynamic, or lack of balance, I suppose, slightly undermines that, but not in all subsectors. And I think we're starting to see, like I say, that demand for better performance requiring that kind of data-driven approach. The only thing I would add to that, though, is that we do need to be careful. A slightly different risk, I suppose, in that question is that we need to be careful that we don't drive unintended consequences from purely data-driven decisions. So one of the things I'm really interested in, I don't know if any of the panelists have a response for this, is how do we look at those sort of those more emotional responses to what we design. So what does the kind of post-occupancy evaluation of the future look like, and how do we combine that kind of hard data that Simon and Joseph talk about with the softer data to say, is this actually a place that you want to live in? Has it delivered the outcomes that you want to? So I'm really interested in that area, and I think it's very easy often to talk about the really kind of technical quantitative data, but what does the qualitative side look like, and how do we make sure that works for us?
I've got, definitely, Ron, and it bridges to exactly what everyone's been saying, and Simon, your point on the truth of data, bringing this one carbon piece together about that I'm working on with the UK BCSD about, how does the impact of carbon, but then this consumer data, which is our IoT company, Isla, but also then what you're talking about there, Ron, which is, well, how does the human then input based on what you built to actually give you feedback on the data loop? The reality is that no company that I've seen, I'm trying to push it as a policy thing, is willing to go for what Simon referenced to as that truth. When you talk about one carbon truth, you are not going to, developers and builders, I can guarantee you, when they put these sensors in the room, they're not going to want to tell you what the real result is against their organization carbon and body carbon. They don't want to tell you the building was 160 tons of CO2 per square meter, and then tell you their organization, because they were flying here, yin, yang, and everywhere and using the wrong stuff, was an extra 60 tons. And then the solar they put on their building will only negate 20 tons of that. And they're offsetting in places like Brazil. But it's that truth. And I think that's the time we've come to. And I think the truth is going to be led by also people's response and hearing from people and hearing from consumers that it's been hard for us specifically. I've had some really, you said it was a net zero home. I thought that would mean zero bills. And it's like, no, we've got to educate, we've got to listen. And I think that time is coming. We've developed a company called ILO, which is a part of our group, which hopefully does that. And there's another number of companies out there coming to do that. But I think as well, from all of us, from Simon and everyone here, like, it's about us accepting it and coming back again to that Simon's point. The truth Are we going to want to? Is everyone going to want to hear that? and what do we do with it once we hear that truth?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joseph. I'm going to come to each of the panelists with my final question, one after the other, which is, what do you think might be possible in the next 10, 20, 50 odd years if the entire industry embraces the full potential of the digital future? What do you see as the kind of the most possible outcomes or the most exciting parts of that future that is possible? While you've got a moment to think on that, before I come to each of you in turn, I'd just like to say we are now wrapping up this conversation. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much to each of the speakers, to Ron, to Joseph, to Chris, and to Simon. It's been really great to get into this conversation with you. For anybody that's listening, whether you're on the webinar right now or you're listening to this as a YouTube recording in the future, if you are interested in the further Workforce for the Future program and any of the grant funded available training for SMEs to engage with MMC, do get in touch with us or have a look at the links below. Or for those of you on the webinar, they have popped up in the chat, and check out our website, follow up with the email links for more information. But to round up, just finally, I'm going to come to each of our panelists in turn with that question of what do you see as the possibilities of the future? Ron, let me come to you first.
So glad you came to me first, because we might say very similar things, I suspect. I'll try and break it down into two things. So one is that we might live in a world where we know what we're going to get. We know what performance looks like. We've spoken a lot about the performance gap today, whether directly or indirectly. And I think as long as we look at performance, not just as the technical stuff, but as actually driving the outcomes we need from our built environment, then that's great. And the second thing is having that confidence in what we're actually going to drive from decisions we make, being able to continuously improve, because frankly we don't at the moment. We start from scratch every time, we make the same mistakes every time. So I think those two things combined would make a much more exciting future.
Thank you. And to Chris.
Yeah, I think mine's really simple. I think looking ahead 10, 20 years, if we embrace digital technologies in our design and throughout the whole process, I mean, we hope that we create climate and social responsible homes for everyone, right? To end the housing shortage and be responsible to the environment in which we live. So that's my hope for, that future state.
Brilliant. Simon.
Yes, I have time to think now. Thank you. In this order, I think safely constructed and built homes, number one. Zero carbon delivered within 10 years, true zero carbon. And a healthy place to live. I know they're big words, simple to say, but I'm not going to put numbers on them, because I normally do actually, but I'm not going to put numbers on. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. And Joseph.
The non-reversible requirement we live in, the stopping of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Using data, we can make a decision. That data will be driven by the correct decision, and instead of constantly having to go back to where we were in 2015 with code for homes, which we're basically doing with Future Home Standard in a less way, we can actually make informed decisions, which stops us going in reverse every few years because politicians decide to make drastic moves on a lack of data.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Simon. And do check out the website if you want to see any more of the websites or the site visits coming up under the Workforce for the Future programme.